Hello everyone and welcome to the next chapter. We're going to talk about the time of day. Now obviously photography without light is like breathing without oxygen. They are synonymous. One cannot work without the other. So it's very important to know about the time of day because at different times of day, different temperatures and intensities of light will occur, and we've got to take that into account when it comes to taking an image. So this is the time of day. Enjoy. So at first you might wonder why it's important that we talk about the time of day. You might think, as long as there's enough light, I'm good. The more light, the better. But it's not quite the case. When the sun rises all the way up until it sets, in its rotation of the Earth, something called atmospheric scattering happens, which means different temperatures of light are shone on the Earth at different times, depending on where you're sitting. Early in the morning, the light catches a lot of dust particles, which means you get a red, orange, yellow hue to the light. As the sun gets higher, the temperature of the light, the color of the light, gets colder and colder, bluer and bluer. There's less dust in the atmosphere. And then as it sets, you get a warmer temperature to the light that's shone on the Earth. So this is obviously really important when we take pictures because color has such a big impact on our images. And those earlier times or later times in the day have warmer, richer colors and is often the preferred time to shoot in. Let's look at the time of day. From the time where there's no light or the light conditions are very unfavorable to the time in the day where the light conditions are perfect, and how to manage each one of them as best we can. So the most common idea is that the best times to shoot are earlier and later in the day, where we get richer colors. Because the light is less intense, we get softer shadows and much more rich colors. Hence why these parts of the day are called the golden hours. Whether it's morning or evening, we can really make use of beautiful global contrast and exhibit magical colors within our image. Contrasting to this, obviously if we shoot later in the day, middle of the day, you get a much harsher light. And not only do you lose a little bit of those rich details because, like we've mentioned before, the brighter the light, the brighter those colors get, which means the closer to white they get, which means you lose some of those colors. But it also means you get harsh shadows, strong lines. The difference between that and the golden hours is that golden hours you still might get shadows, but they're cast in a much more softer pattern than the middle of the day where shadows can have very strong lines. And if those lines go across your subject, they can become very distracting. But the middle of the day is by no means a time to put your camera down. There are ways we can deal with the light in less favorable conditions. And in the middle of the day, there's various things you can do. If your subject is dark and you're getting a lot of midday light, if you underexpose the image or even neutrally expose the image, your image might become too dark and you'll lose details on your subject. Contrasting to that, if your subject has beautiful blonde hair, it could be a lion, it could be a human, and you get a lot of that midday light hitting your subject. If you overexpose the subject, you'll blow out all that hair. It'll become too bright, it'll clip, you'll lose the detail. You might not even be able to tell the difference between that hair and the background. So you underexpose, you reserve those details. There's always a way around difficult light conditions, if they're not perfect. But in most cases, the earlier or later is a better time to shoot. The important thing to know with shooting in the middle of the day is deciding on what you want to retain. If you're looking at a scene, because of the strong light conditions, you might be losing highlights or losing shadows. So you've got to decide in each scene what I want to save. And if my clouds are getting too bright and I want to reserve some details in there, I might just have to underexpose a little bit. The image itself might look like the clouds have very little detail, but in post-processing and a little bit of clever editing, you can get the clouds back, you can get those details back. And the same thing goes for shadows. There might be strong shadows on your subject, but by just exposing cleverly, giving it just enough light in the shadows, you still might be able to retain them at a later stage. There will be a loss of detail, there always is a loss of detail, but with clever exposure, that loss might be manageable. Another problem that comes about when shooting in the middle of the day comes with another problem, and it's heat. And we'll often find our subjects, especially in wildlife, will retreat to the shade, and they'll lie in the shade or even stand in the shade or even do various activities in the shade. And the problem about being in the shade, say of a tree, is that everything that's around your subject is very bright and holding a lot of detail more than you'd like, and your subject sitting in a dark place, the shade. So if you expose it neutrally or anywhere within that exposure latitude, you'll have a dark subject and a bright background full of details, and quite honestly the end result is completely rubbish. So there's a technique that we can use to actually make something out of this. It's more of an artistic approach, but we can shoot a high key image. There's many times as wildlife photographers that we're faced with a subject that's sitting in the shade, and often people put their cameras down. But when they apply this approach, you can actually create something very beautiful. And the way it works is you completely forsake the foreground, all the bright areas that are getting sunlight, and you overexpose the image, sometimes 2 stops, 3 stops, to the point where the whole foreground and background are blown out. It's so bright. Even your subject might be very bright, but the point is to lose those details completely, to clip as far as you can, but retain just enough detail in your subject to play with later. It's very rare that these high key approaches end with the rendered image inside your camera. It often involves some post-processing and a sprinkle of creativity, but it's quite easy to do, and the end result can be truly beautiful. So that's another way of using the harsh light of the midday hours to your advantage in creating something beautiful. Now we're going to chat about the times of day, or even the times of night, the times when light conditions are very unfavorable or there's not enough light at all. And there's a few things we can do to make sure we can still get beautiful images. And the first thing is we've got to realize our cameras these days can do a lot more than we think they can. We often get told by professionals that you should never go above 6400 ISO. Some even say less. Some say I'll never shoot above 3200 ISO. But I've always said a beautiful composition trumps detail. So if you have a magical moment in a magical scene, kick your ISO up as much as you need. Remember, we can fix the noise generated by high ISOs and rather capture the image, and you never know, it could work out. Quite often on safari, I've shown my guests a scene that's almost completely dark. We just have moonlight to work with, and you simply put your camera on a beanbag, and we've put our shutter speeds at a tenth of a second and ISO 25,000. We're literally shooting under moonlight, and quite often the idea is resisted by my clients until they take the picture and they see actually there's a lot of colors and details that the camera was able to retain, and they were able to capture a really beautiful image. So trust that your camera can do a lot more than you think you can. Even when the sun's gone down and there's no light, you can't even see colors. Test the camera's abilities. Send that thing to 25,000, 30,000 ISO. Shoot a standing lion on a ridge, even though it's dark, at a tenth of a second. If he's still, you can capture something. So push the boundaries of what your camera can do. Another way of dealing with low light conditions or dark conditions, it's too dark to take an image, is to use a spotlight. Now, there's an unethical way of using a spotlight and an ethical way. Whether you can tell or not, I'm not sure. Some guides use it badly, some guides use it well, and keep the light out of the animal's eyes, which is what you want to do. But with the use of a spotlight, and even better, a spotlight of another Jeep, you can create really beautiful images through spotlight photography. Due to the backlight that's created by a spotlight, you get a beautiful golden outline of your animal's profile. So a spotlight used correctly can certainly help you in challenging light conditions. Another thing to help you in challenging light conditions, now this could be that it's very dark and you can't see your subject, all the way to if there's bright light coming behind your subject and you want to retain the colors in that light, but your subject's too dark, you can use a flash. A flash is intended to fill in light where there isn't any where you want there to be. And with that light comes details. Remember, if your subject's dark and you want it to be brighter, you're going to lose details in that adjustment. So a flash can be a useful tool to just shoot a little bit of light into those areas so you can retain those details. Now, a flash can be used highly unethically, and my advice is if you're traveling to an area, ask your guide about what is ethical and not ethical. The simple rule with wildlife is that diurnal animals, animals that walk around during the day, who are active during the day, are not affected by a flash during the day. During the night they are. That becomes unethical. Nocturnal animals, animals that are active during the night, you can use a flash on them at night. But the key is sparingly. There's a lot of photographers out there who let their flash fire. And no matter if it's a diurnal animal and it's during the day or it's nocturnal and it's during the night, that is going to have a negative impact on the animal. So plan your shot and use it sparingly. One click, and you get your shot. A flash is not a tool that you can use relentlessly and let it fire away and fire away. It becomes unethical and detrimental to the scene that you're viewing. But in the right moment and used sparingly, it can help you retain those background colors as well as cast a little bit of light onto your subject so you can retain those details. And is a very effective tool in challenging light conditions, both dark and in the middle of the day when the light's very harsh and in the wrong angle. Another great approach to challenging light conditions is using motion blur or pan blurring. If there's not enough light to take a sharp image and your subject is still moving, you don't have to put your camera down. It's a perfect opportunity to pan blur or motion blur. When we purposefully When we purposefully leave our shutter speed long enough that the lines will blur with the camera's movement, it evokes a feeling of movement, a very powerful tool to creating art, especially art that you want to evoke a feeling of movement. So when the light's really low, there's not enough light to take a picture and your subject is still moving. Down your shutter speed, go slow, and try pan blurring and motion blurring. You can create some very beautiful images with this technique. So there's always a way to deal with challenging light conditions. No matter what time of the day, there's a picture to be taken. Don't underestimate what your camera is capable of, and certainly don't underestimate your artistic and creative boundaries. So that's the time of day, the effects the sun has on the temperature of light that's cast on the world around you, and how to capitalize on that light and that color. And when light is not enough, how to use creative approaches and certain tools to help you deal with that light and still come out with a good image. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you for the next one.